If you've ever moved from an older system like one from the early 2000s to a relatively more modern system, you'd probably notice a significant performance improvement. And while a lot of it has to do with the fact that you are on a more modern platform, a big part of it also comes from the storage media that the computer itself uses. It probably boots from an SSD or solid-state drive. The only problem with SSDs is that they are much more expensive than their hard drive equivalents. So system integrators like Lenovo tend to use smaller SSD capacities just to keep their system prices competitive, which means that it is very easy to run out of storage on these solid-state drives, which I have done. I've already exceeded 200 gigabytes out of 256 gigabytes on the NVMe boot drive of this computer. So today, we are going to swap out that drive with this 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. Welcome everyone to the first episode of a new series I'd like to call Driving Me Crazy. Let's get to work. There are two steps that we have to follow in order to make a drive swap. The first one is to clone the drive, so all the data on the original drive is transferred over to the new drive, and then the second step is to actually physically swap the drives. So here we have all the parts. Here's the SSD, here are the screws to mount it, and here is the adapter itself. So first, we want to line this screw with the 80mm hole because the SSD's form factor is M.2 2280. Then the next part is to install the SSD. So here we have a notch. Line that up with the notch on the adapter like so and put it in. It's going to sit at an angle, that's fine, because we're going to use a screw to hold it down. And now the SSD is installed. Perfect. So here we have the enclosure, and now we're going to put in the PCB with the SSD into the enclosure. So just do it like that, gently. Don't want to scratch anything. Okay. And then get your screws. We just use two of these darker ones. Now that our enclosure is ready, we can connect it to the computer. We have our Type-C to Type-C cable here. And it doesn't matter which way you put it in because it's a Type-C port, it's reversible. And then here on the side of the laptop, we have a Type-C port that uses the Thunderbolt 3 standard. So there we go. And now it's time to clone the drive. So now we're in the computer, and the software I'm going to use to clone the drive is called AOMEI Backupper standard. So here we have the software itself, but before we do that, we have to create a partition for the disk itself. So here, as you can see on this menu, disk 2, that's the 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, is already installed. The computer recognizes it, but we don't have any partitions, so it's practically useless. And Windows, as you will see here in this PC, does not recognize this drive. You can actually see my storage usage for the original NVMe SSD. It's pretty bad. So the first thing to do is to initialize the disk and use the GPT partition style. Wait a bit, and now it's online. So now that the disk has been initialized, there is one large partition, but it's unallocated. So we need to create a new simple volume. Here we have the wizard, and check that out. You have 953,000 megabytes or 953 gigabytes. So we set the simple volume size in megabytes to the maximum disk space so we could use all of it. Then next, we have applied the following drive letter. we can use F because C is the NVMe drive and E is the hard drive, so we use F. Next, and we use NTFS as the file system. Click Next, and after that, you will see that Windows does recognize this as a drive that you can write files to. So now we can start the cloning process. So we search for AOMEI Backupper standard, clone, disk clone, and you'll see that we have 3 drives visible right here. So we select the source disk first, and that is the disk that you want to extract the data from. So that will be the 256 gig NVMe drive that is currently installed on the computer's motherboard, so we select that. Then after that, we select the destination disk. That's the drive that we actually want to put the data in, which will be disk 2, this one, the 1 terabyte NVMe SSD that's currently installed in the Type-C port on the laptop, so you select that. After that, you perform the operation, and since there's no data on the new disk, we can start the cloning process right now. And if you see the partitions on the new drive, all of the existing data on the old drive will be put in, all the partitions will be the same size, and then we will have 700 gigabytes of unallocated partition. We can create that later. So right now, we can add the unused space if we want to eliminate that step. But for now, I'm just going to copy without resizing the partition so we can create a brand new partition later on. So we can start the clone now, and this will be relatively quick as it's a transfer from NVMe SSD to NVMe SSD, and I will get back to you after we have finished cloning. So after 20 minutes of waiting, the disk clone is finally finished. You can see over here that the original partitions on the 256 gig NVMe boot drive on this computer, marked Windows C and Lenovo D, have now been copied over to the 1 terabyte NVMe drive that's connected to the USB-C port, and the partitions are now marked as Windows H and Lenovo I. So you can see that all of these are pretty much identical. So now that the OS has been installed on the new drive, we can now turn this computer off and replace the drives, and the computer should boot from the new drive right off the bat. So now that the drive cloning is finished and the computer is turned off, first thing you want to do is unplug the adapter and take out the SSD. Okay, then we remove the SSD itself. And be careful, it's hot right after the cloning process, so only touch the edges. Now we can put these away, and then we can start to open up the rear panel. Okay, now let's put this over here. And remember to unplug the power supply cable before opening it up. And then just remove all the screws that hold the rear panel in place. Now this varies per laptop, so be sure to check out the maintenance manual on where the screws are and what kind of screwdrivers you need. Alright, now that we have all the screws off, we can open this up. If your fingers don't work, you can grab a card to pry the rear panel off. Now that you have your card, you want to pry the rear panel open. Just look for an opening. Just be careful. And now, there you are. So that right there is the 256 gig NVMe SSD. So before we do anything, we must unplug the battery connector to the motherboard, which is this one. So just gently pry it out. Just wiggle it a little bit to get it to move. And there we go. Just leave it there. So now we have the M.2 drive right here. And we swap that with the 1 terabyte Sandisk drive. Again, same procedure. Put it in the slot at an angle. There we go, just make sure it's secure. And bolt it down using the screw. All right, drive installed. We can now reinstall the battery connector and the rear panel. Right, now that it's all installed, all our screws are back in, we can boot the computer. There we go, it's back on. Then I will be showing you guys a boot time comparison between the old SSD and the new SSD. Because the old SSD was over 90% full, whereas this one is less than 50%. So we'll see the effects of filling up an SSD beyond its 80% capacity in this clip. Thanks for watching, guys. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Please also remember to hit that bell icon if you want to be notified of any new uploads that I make. Post your questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, or suggestions down in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video.